Hello, I'm Stephen O'Malley from Civic Engineers. We're transport, civil and structural engineers, and we've had the privilege of being working on this park for the last number of years. So it's my pleasure to give you a little bit of an overview as to what the park is and how we got here. It's very much thanks to Manchester City Council in its partnership with U&I and Transport for Greater Manchester, as well as LCR, London Continental Railways. The park itself is 6.5 acres. It's at the heart of a £1.4 billion regen scheme, right in the heart of the city centre here. We've got Depot Mayfield immediately over my shoulder, but just on the other side of that is Piccadilly Station, so you can get a sense of just how close to the city centre we are. It's an intrinsically, inherently sustainable location. The project has got climate resilience at its heart, and we are very, very proud and privileged to have been able to contribute to the combined efforts of the group to deliver an agenda that makes sure the city is able to deal with the changes in climate that we're confronted with. And we're going to talk to you today about some of the design features and some of the other sustainability qualities that have been delivered during the course of this particular project. Hi Duncan, how are you?
Yeah, not too bad,
Good to see
Stephen.
you.
Yeah, good to see you.
Yeah, this is fabulous to be here today, isn't it?
I know, yeah, several years on.
Indeed.
The river flowing through.
And the opportunity to chat around this fabulous park.
Yeah.
It's nothing short of joyful to find ourselves here in this space, to be stood here on this bridge over the Medlock and all of the benefits that it brings with it. What are your kind of key enduring observations now at this point in time?
I think just the sound of the Medlock's a pretty amazing thing, because I remember our first site visit, the river was completely still, and just seeing a constant flow of water coming all the way through. And if you close your eyes, you could be anywhere. You very much feel connected to nature just by that sound and that trickle. Even on a pretty gloomy day like today, the amount of light flooding into the watercourse is a huge difference, because 50 plus metres of this river was culverted before, so it was underneath a building or underneath a concrete slab. And then where we had the river in other areas, it was behind an 8-metre high wall. So suddenly, it gives the opportunity for things to self-seed as well as the things that we've put into the river. And you can already see from, again, this time of year, you don't get a huge amount in terms of bird life and things like that, but there's already ducks nesting underneath bridges and in some of the reeds, and it makes a huge difference as a wildlife corridor. You can really see the value of improving a river like this, and the value that creates in terms of wildlife.
I think it's fair to say that the river was recognised right from the outset as a key armature on which the rest of the design was hung, or sort of structured around and formed.
Definitely, I'd say that the river and the depot are probably the two pivotal pieces of the overall master plan, which started to take shape back in 2016. I think that's why the park feels like it really lands and sits well within this site and within Manchester.
I think that's a really key point in terms of trying to reinstate this natural watercourse through this landscape and offer that up and all of the benefits that come with that when you spend time in this space, recognising, of course, that it's got 200 years of development history here that have been layered over the top of it. A key part of that has been an attempt to try and reinstate the sustainable drainage features that the river is the ultimate focus of. But as I'm sure you are only too well aware, that these tendrils extend right the way across all of this landscape to pick up the water and slowly manage it and return it back to this water course over an extended period of time, which in and of itself is bringing that higher degree of resilience and reducing the risk of flooding to this part of Manchester. And downstream, it's increasing its ability to be able to slow down and moderate the rate at which the water passes through the system.
The park attenuates the river's floodwater, but then the park also drinks water that's running off from footpaths and from future buildings. I think that the second part of that is a key consideration of every single project going forwards, and I think incorporation of rain gardens and things like that has become so much more commonplace. I think the biggest challenge from a water perspective here was about, as soon as you open up the river from its culvert, it behaves differently. It deals with a number of different climate scenarios, so the 1 in 100 year plus climate change scenario. The whole of this park can flood, including the Mayfield lawn space, and that's been set at a level that it can take floodwater without affecting upstream or downstream. And then it also allows for the plots around this park to, in the future, be able to still operate.
Here in Manchester, we experienced some very, very hot temperatures during this summer, and the planting is really important here in the park and how it might ameliorate some of those worst aspects.
Yeah, well, resilience in terms of planting is all about different extremes. So one extreme, as we talked about, is the flooding in the river, but the other extreme I think we should go and have a look at is the drought tolerance, so planting that's going to do well in those warm conditions. So perhaps let's take a walk.
So Duncan, we've moved from the riverside to the plant side almost here. Perhaps you might just share with us the inspiration behind your choices here for this planting.
Well, we were really inspired by our first visit to the site when we were up on the depot, and there was all sorts of colonising plants. So you can see behind us there, you've got trees that are still trying to climb up the side of the building. And I think being inspired from that made us think more about resilient plants for those kind of conditions where you have quite poor soil conditions, you have quite steep level changes. You can see here on the right hand side, a lot of those plants have been picked because they do well in drought conditions and they're south facing. And we found that in the summer when we had that very hot spell, that this bed in particular, all the way along the side, south facing, did really well. Absolutely loved it. And even the trees, so things like the hippophes and the pine trees did really well in those conditions, whereas the more native species that we used in the park, like the oak trees, they had problems in terms of they lost some of their leaves for that period. And I think that's going to happen more and more. And I think in terms of our planting choices as designers, we really need to incorporate more resilient plants and think about designing for those kind of instances. Across the whole park, I think we've got 120,000 plants that went in. We've got several metres squared of pre-planted systems. And it's really been a combination of both pot plants that we've been able to procure locally, but also a lot of these pre-grown systems that we've used around the river. And I think in terms of an overall kind of resilience in terms of establishment, that's worked really well as a system.
In terms of resilient landscapes, the other part of this is also the evapotranspiration of the plants.
We have 120,000 new plants that have gone in here, so there's a huge amount of planting that can aid that. On the left-hand side here, we've got rain gardens, and all of those plants help to intercept water and keep it on site rather than it going back into the system. And what you're seeing here is a real kind of ecosystem of lots of different planting types, lots of different levels conditions, and plants really kind of working together to provide both a function in terms of water, but also provide habitat in terms of encouraging wildlife and birds and engaging people in nature in the city.
Well, on that point, why don't we pick up on the structures, how they were incorporated into the scheme as well. So Duncan, we've talked about the river and we've been talking about the planting, but the other really distinctive feature of this landscape is the repurposing of the hogback beams, which were uncovered as P.P. O'Connor opened up the culverted river and discovered these really distinctive features. The broader point here in repurposing of the beams, as well as the collaborative approach to the continued evolution of the design through that construction phase, was a saving of carbon in the order of about 235 metric tons of carbon, the equivalent, I'm reliably informed, of driving to the moon and back in a diesel car. But from an identity and an aesthetic perspective, there is an authenticity that comes with picking out these elements or components and repositioning them in the landscape.
This whole park design has always been about creating that Mancunian authenticity. I think the point I'd add to the hogback beams is the timing of when they were incorporated into the design. It wasn't something that was known at the start. It took us to actually open up the culvert and reveal them to realise the quality that they were there. And I think the design had to respond to that at quite a late stage. So I think for other clients listening to this and other developers listening to this, I think being open to change and to tweak the design can have a big impact in terms of saving carbon.
Well, the saving of carbon obviously is a really important factor, but the other really critical element to this was cost saving.
Yeah.
So these features, these techniques and the incorporation of these elements was actually cheaper in construction cost than bringing in and replacing with the new. So it was quite beneficial across a number of different facets and bringing that quality to the site and to the scheme. Anyway, I've got some questions that I need to go and answer, but come head off in this direction with me, we can have a further chat about those.